We had 98 people respond to our survey, which was amazing. One of the things that we first wanted to look at was which category did you fall in, as far as if you were somebody at risk, somebody living with someone at risk, or if you didn't have any health concerns. And we found out that majority of our clients, 2/3 of them, didn't have any health concerns or conditions. So we thought that was good to know. The next thing we wanted to look at was, if you're going out, would you be wearing a face mask, just to kind of gauge where everyone's at with face masks. And again, we found that 2/3 of the clients are wearing face masks when they go out, and then another third of them are wearing them sometimes. And again, we wanted to gauge that because some of us on the staff are wearing them, so we kind of wanted to see if our clients would be as well, for when they're coming into the office, to know how safe we'll feel with things. Another thing we wanted to look at was if you're leaving your home to go shopping for groceries or just shopping in general. And again, we found that 2/3 of the clients are leaving their house and they are doing their shopping. So we only had a really small number where they are staying pretty much home and sheltering in place with no contact of going outside. And then the other third was doing a combination of both. And we found that that's probably some people who are trying to support the small businesses and having some food delivery there when they get tired of cooking. Next slide. The next thing we wanted to find out was, as the government decides to open, Texas, today was the first day with hair salons, nail salons, everything's kind of opening up. We wanted to gauge how comfortable our clients were going to be as far as going back out and coming into the office for business. And we found that it was pretty even, as far as 35% of the clients said that they wanted to see what was going to happen, if there's maybe going to be a surge in cases or maybe a surge in hospitalization. We found another third that says they're comfortable now. So if we were to open the office, they'd be there. And then there was another third that wanted to continue doing go-to meetings. And not all of our clients are here in Texas. We have them all across the country. So there's some clients that they were doing go-to meetings before this. And then we found that some have said that, they really like this go-to meeting option, and they may find themselves doing go-to meetings more in the future as people are becoming a little bit more familiar with it. So again, we found those results again to be pretty much a third, and a third. And then the final one that we looked at was, if you're going to feel more comfortable going to businesses where they are wearing face masks. In Dallas County, most of the businesses there are requiring people to wear face masks while they're out. And we found that 65% of the clients do feel more comfortable. And then another 28% of them said it didn't really matter to them. So we asked this just to kind of gauge where you were, because some of the staff, again, will be wearing face masks when you come in. And so we just wanted to make sure that people would be okay if they saw that when they did come into their service meetings. Next slide. So as we plan to reopen, Brian is at the office now. So if anybody does need to stop at the office and drop something off, or they need to pick something up, we do have Brian in the office, but we are putting everything in place that we're going to cover here, to where we will be open by the 18th with these things in place. So if you're coming in for an in-service meeting, we are going to keep 30-minute increments between, so that we have the time to clean the office and sanitize it. We will be using a hospital-grade disinfectant, and we're going to be following those instructions as far as how much time that has to soak before you do wipe that down, so that it is actually disinfected and not sanitized. The building will also be doing some additional safety measures. We are going to be doing, like you see at a lot of the grocery stores and retail stores in general, where there is going to be a plexiglass shield up at the front desk. So when you come in to see Taylor, we didn't want to have anybody really standing just over her and possibly talking down on her if they're not wearing masks. So you will see that in place. We also have ordered a thermal imaging thermometer to do temperatures, to where we're not going to be invasive, but then that way we can kind of see from a distance if anybody does have a temperature, along with staff members and any guests coming into the building. And then the final thing that we are going to be doing is controlling the flow of traffic by having everybody come into the main glass doors like everybody normally does. But we're going to be asking everybody to leave out the side door that we have, that some clients have went out before, but our staff typically only use that, so that we're keeping the traffic flow, that nobody's going to be coming into face-to-face contact with the 6 feet distancing. We'll just kind of keep that distance there. And then next slide. This is some of the safety measures that the building will be doing at the Landmark building. So you're going to see signs up as you come to visit, the social distancing, and as anybody who has been out shopping, you kind of see these everywhere now. You're going to have markers so that you'll know where the 6 feet is. They're going to be encouraging hand washing, but the building is also putting automatic sanitizers throughout the building. So as you go to get on the elevator, as you get off the elevator, you're going to find these so that you feel a little bit more comfortable that as you've had to make any contact with any surfaces in the building, you'll have that chance to sanitize. And then we will also have hand sanitizers in the office as well. So a lot of things just to try to make it as comfortable as possible. One thing we are also looking at is we have an air purifier in our office. We're looking at another opportunity to possibly put another air purifier or a possible UV sanitizer. So that's something we don't have in place yet, but that's another thing that we are looking at.
Great. Tab, thank you. Also remind people, if you guys have any questions as we go through our presentation, there's a speech balloon you can click on and type in a message, and we'll be able to answer any questions you may have. Now I want to turn the presentation over to Mike to talk a little bit about the economies and the portfolios.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending. The story of the market that we've seen has really been a 1-2 punch with the COVID-19 as well as the Saudi Russian battle that's going on as far as oil production. And so I wanted to create this slide that shows us where oil was back on Jan 6th. It hit its high at just over $63 a barrel. Today it closed right around $24.61 a barrel. So the slide's a little bit dated. When I say dated, a couple days, but highlighting a couple of the events that occurred. That March 6th to 9th weekend is when the output battle started with Russia. And that slide from that Jan 6th to that March 6th weekend, that initial slide, that caused a little bit of a drag on our riskiest equity portfolio. And since then, we've been outpacing the S&P throughout this entire virus situation. So believe it or not, from the start of the virus to the low point was 5 weeks, and we have now been in a 7-week recovery. During that time, the market is down, the S&P is down 13%. But if you would have woke up in the middle of that thing from your nap, you would have seen us down 34+% and been terrified. So the market is coming back. Oil did hit a low point. You see that big dip here on the slide. And that dip, what was happening is, I talked about it in our last presentation, but producers had nowhere to store their oil. So they were paying people to take oil off their hands. And you saw negative oil prices for the front May contracts. And as soon as that day ended, as soon as contracts expired, the June contracts picked right back up again. So you're seeing oil be what I think is somewhat of a leading indicator to this economy coming back. And you see that with that curve. You have 23, at the time of this writing, 23 of the 50 states have been lifting quarantines. I believe it's more like 28 now, but that is going to continue to increase. How quickly we recover, I think is going to depend on that demand and that oil coming back. Again, I see it as a leading indicator. Mitch, can you please go to the next slide for me? So I think that the Chinese have been trying to hide this COVID virus that was basically unleashed onto the marketplace. Back in, I believe it was December, they halted all traffic in and out of Wuhan to the rest of mainland China, but yet got on people's cases for not letting people from Wuhan enter their countries. So they basically let free travel go out in and out of Wuhan to the world, but kept China insulated from it. And I think there's going to be a heavy price to pay. If any of you guys are college football fans, back in the 80s, SMU received what was called the death penalty. And SMU's program is still trying to recover from the sanctions that it received back in the early to mid 80s. And I think there's going to be a repercussion on China that they're going to have 20+ years recovery time. I would think if you're 3 years from now doing business and China is your only lifeline and that's your single point failure, you got to have your head examined. They are not reliable trading partners, and they're stealing our technology. And finally, we have a president that's going to take them to task. So yeah, I hope that continues.
Yeah, something I wanted to add to that is you're seeing a lot of their foreign neighbors are rolling out the red carpet to the United States and European countries and saying, look, we know China has been a great partner for you. Why don't you come set up your factory or facility in our country, and we'll treat you more fairly. So you're going to see a lot of the factories probably relocate to other parts of, Central, Southeast Asia.
So I wanted to show this slide. Thanks, Mitch. I wanted to show this slide. What are we doing with your investments? Our ADV and ADVP portfolios have an ETF in it called EEM, which you see on the left side of your screen. And the top left panel is the EEM breakdown by country. The bottom is by sector. And you can see between Hong Kong and China, it makes up about 40% of that emerging market. We don't want that exposure. We think there's going to be definite pain throughout that country for a long time to come, like I said. So we have replaced that. We shifted some things around to focus a little bit more on technology. If you look at the right-hand side of your screen, these are the Qs, which is the NASDAQ 100. And you see it's mainly a domestic company, but even more than that, it's a technology-focused company. And if you look at the top three holdings, technology, consumer cyclicals, and healthcare, we think those are going to do really well coming out of this COVID virus. Mitch, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so Mitch has told this story to you guys before. Bonds just are not paying anything. In the past, it's been a really nice mixture to have bonds as a safety net in your portfolio. And I wanted to just show this slide and say bonds are dead. This is why. If you look at the thick red line that goes across the screen, that's a 2% inflation target by the Federal Reserve. If you look at the light blue line that floats through this target, that's your consumer pricing index, CPI, which is basically how you gauge inflation. And I highlighted that last part of it as the blue line comes down. That's oil prices. So if oil's going down, you're going to see more of a deflation than inflation. But if the Fed's target is 2%, look at inflation. Look at each of these lines. So the 30 years in the red, that's a 30-year treasury on the red line, 1.3%. 10 years. The 10-year line is at 0.65%. Go down to the 2-year, 0.36%. I mean, goodness gracious. The 10-year, you're just not making any money. Yeah, there's no risk there, but there's no return there either. So if you're trying to live off of a targeted budget and you think bonds are the way to go, you're going to have a very tough ride. I'd like to go to the next slide, please. One of the things that we do at Fluent Financial is something I do for my mom's portfolio. My dad and I have done it for over 25 years, and we generate income with her current holdings. So if she's holding X number of stocks, we generate call income and collect dividends on that income, and it's called our stock income portfolio. And we tell people that we need $1 million to get in that portfolio, and we target a 1% cash gen every month. Now remember, a 10-year bond is paying 35 basis points, 0.35%. We target 1% a month. And some of the holdings that we have are Amgen, Cisco, Chevron, Johnson & Johnson, 3M, companies that are not going to be going out of business in 10 years. So, and these companies also are paying over a 4% dividend. I believe our portfolio is paying around a 4.4% dividend. And you're talking about 35 basis points for a 10-year U.S. Treasury. So add to that dividend what we're creating, generating our 1% a month target. Take a look at this chart here in front of you. Your blue line is your average portfolio size. And obviously you see we wanted it to be $1 million or more. You see it take that dip there as you go between February and March. And that was that big drop between February 19th and the bottom of the market right now is shown to be March 23rd. The green line is what we are producing off of that portfolio. So the percentage scale is off to your right, and we target 1%. Well, you can see we did really well at the beginning of the year, achieving that 1% target. But as that market fell, I did not want to sell a bunch of calls into a cratering market. So we held off. That little data table on your far right, you can see at the March 23rd, the 323 level, our average portfolio size was only $776,000. I only generated 19 basis points on that. But even with that, we started coming out of the next month, we generated 77 basis points. And this month, we're right at our 1%. So we are averaging 1.16% cash generation on our call writing portfolio for you to live off of if you are part of this portfolio, like my mother like we do for my mother. And think about that rate of return versus a 35 basis point U.S. Treasury. And I think this portfolio makes sense to a lot of people needing an income stream. Mitch?
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the update. And again, the idea of this whole portfolio is, how do you create a retirement paycheck? You build this nest egg, you enter retirement, and the old adage 60% equities, 40% bonds is what your mix should be. But as Mike had talked about, and I've mentioned to you guys over the years, with interest rates going to be bouncing around zero for many, many years to come, the bond market's going to provide very little rate of return for you. Its main benefits can be diversification, but if you pull off 40% of your portfolio and that's producing basically zero for you, that's dead wood. And what we're doing at Fluent Financial is we are using puts to basically show to provide the diversification to minimize the risk. So, and we will be adding puts back in the portfolio. Right now, we are not doing that because the VIX and the volatility index is still too high, which means the put prices are too high. The way to look at it is, it's like you have your house in the forest and there's a forest fire coming towards your house. So the fire insurance premiums are much higher. So we're going to wait for that to come down a little bit and reinstigate or reapply puts to the number of our portfolios.
Hey, Mitch, I think you hit something that you're not sharing your screen anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the screen either. And I wanted to make one more comment on that graph.
There you go.
The last comment I'd like to make on this graph, if you guys look at that blue line at the average portfolio size, starting at just over $1 million, and today it's right around 977. During that time, we've taken over 8% cash out of the portfolio, and we've barely touched the principal in the portfolio. So it really is a nice way to generate income and live off of that portfolio.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. A lot of people are concerned about the amount of money both our federal government has been spending or printing and spending, and then the Federal Reserve basically printing money and bumping up their balance sheet to basically support a lot of large financial institutions. And what is this going to mean for debt? You can just see this rocket ship of debt the Federal Reserve has created over the past 6 weeks. I mean, this is a huge number. But I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. And this doesn't get a lot of discussion. We started talking about this in the last couple of weeks of our service meetings, and this is why. This is a chart that we pulled back from 2013 that we were using. And on the y-axis here, you have the real GDP growth, and then the x-axis is gross debt to GDP. And the size of the dot dictates how much interest the government needs to pay on its debt to attract people to buy its bonds. So if you focus here on the U.S., again, this is 7 years ago, we were paying about 3 or 4% on our debt, almost equal to Singapore, and about 110%. Again, this is gross debt, not net. But what I want to focus on is look at Japan. Look how small that dot is. They're paying very, very little interest, and their debt to GDP is 240%. And I think our politicians and members of the Federal Reserve are looking at Japan out here, and Japan's the third largest economy. Their demographics are horrific. And what I mean by that is Japan's population is very homogeneous. They're Japanese, like other Japanese. They like to keep the Japanese. And so they have very strict immigration policies, and that coupled with the fact that women in childrearing years, birth rate is only 0.6%. In comparison to the United States, it's about 2.0%. And for our country's population to grow, you need to have it be 2% or higher. So half of Japan's population is going to go away. So you got these horrible demographics, tons of debt, third largest economy, has it collapsed. The answer is no. Now, Japan hasn't had phenomenal growth, but it hasn't had phenomenal collapses. And Japan really invented the quantitative easing type strategy. Again, that's when you print money, then use that money to buy assets to support them. And the Federal Reserve, as well as our government, I talked about this in a prior webinar, the three-legged stool, they're providing this bridge to help our economy get from where it was in this big chasm that we're crawling out of to back to where it is. And the reason they're doing that is during 2008, 2009, they were too slow to respond with the liquidity and the financial support. So we had a big downdraft in our markets. A lot of people were laid off. It took us about 4 years to get back where we were. We don't know when the medical solution will come. I mean, our president went on TV this weekend and said we'll have a vaccine by the end of the year. I know Pfizer and Oxford said they'll have one by this fall. That may be a bit aggressive. What if we don't get one? And does that mean it's going to be the end of the world? No, it may be something like HIV or just something we live with. When HIV and AIDS came out in the 80s, people had no idea how this was going to end, and it decimated a generation of people on the continent of Africa. But I do think they will find a solution. But the debt situation, and this is JP Morgan, but I've read a lot of information, a lot of areas. We don't anticipate having rampant high inflation for quite some time, because the United States, with all the problems that we have, we are still the primary reserve currency, and we're the country of choice when people want to invest money that they know they're going to get their money back when that debt matures. And as Mike showed you on a previous slide, Treasury market's paying absolutely nothing. The cash in the mattress is starting to look like a good alternative for people that want to have a lot of money in bonds, and plus you don't have the interest rate risk, because when interest rates do start to ratchet up, you're going to be taking some huge losses in your bonds, and the bonds you've been holding when that happens haven't been paying you much along the way. So you're literally being pushed into the equity markets with dividends and covered call income to have the income you need to live the life that you want to live. So I'll focus on China briefly. These are some reports that came out, and in January, when they're trying to tell the world this isn't a big deal, they are just hoarding all this PPE gear, and at the same time, they're basically telling the factories that produce goods for the rest of the world, no, you can't ship that to us. We need it. We're going to buy it from you. So China, again, was being a little disingenuous. Next slide I want to talk about is hydroxychloroquine. HCQ is the name that you see. And you're seeing more and more evidence, not anecdotal, but pure evidence where this is actually working. And people that have had lupus and rheumatoid arthritis who have been taking this to deal with those diseases, it has a tendency to act as a prophylactic or prophylaxis for them. And you see a very low infection rate. Out of 65,000 people, I think this came out of Italy, you only had a 0.03 infection rate. So that's a really good sign. And hydroxychloroquine is about $1.50 to $1 per pill. And it's not getting as much press, in my opinion, as it should. And I think there's some reasons for that. I'll talk about that here in just a minute. The other thing that we're seeing some good news is the plasma therapy. This is when you have a person who's had COVID and recovers. They have antibodies in their bloodstream. They do a blood plasma donation. The doctors spin it and put it back into a patient. So they've had a lot of success with that. Both of these you really can't patent. You can't make a lot of money off of. So I don't know if that's why, but there's some evidence that may be the case. This next slide, Bill Gates has done a lot of good work with vaccines. His foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates, has done a lot of good work with helping vaccinate the world. Dr. Birx, who was appointed by the previous administration, acted as the global AIDS coordinator. Gates, Fauci, and Birx have also worked with the Clinton family, Pelosi, George Soros, who is not a friend of the United States. And Birx's daughter works for the Gates Foundation. This little star here really disturbs me. Why are Gates and Fauci are big proponents for a vaccine, but they've spoken out publicly against hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for the coronavirus when there is a bunch of evidence around the world when given early, it has a very good treatment protocol for many patients. Now, if you give it too late and if people have heart conditions, the outcomes may not be as good. But I can see why Gates is against this, because he's got how many billions invested in vaccine delivery systems. Fauci's a little bit different story. Then if you look down here, this Wuhan laboratory where this virus allegedly has come from, I think it has. It's one of the biggest in the world, and they've been doing research on this lab for a long, long time. And the SARS outbreak that happened in 2002 and 3 came out of the same lab. So the lab does not have the best safety record. So this is something I discovered. I just was very upset. You've heard of the drug remdesivir. It's made by Gilead Sciences. And these are people on the NIH panel who Dr. Fauci is the director of. So these are his co-workers. Look at the conflicts of interest. These guys are on Gilead's payroll. No wonder they want to recommend a $1,000 treatment over a dollar pill because it's a monetary thing. So it's kind of frustrating. And there was a test done on remdesivir where they were going to say, well, we can show better treatments or similar to hydroxychloroquine. But what they found is that the people dying versus recovering, the sample group who were getting medication and the placebo group, there wasn't much difference. The only difference that was positive was they spent fewer days in the hospital. So they moved the goalpost and took out the survival rate because the numbers weren't as good. So that's a little disappointing. This part here is something else that I discovered over the past week and a half, gain of function. And I didn't know what that term was. I talked to some of my doctor clients. Some of them did not know what this meant. And gain of function studies the potential enhancement of the pathogenicity and transmissibility of potential pandemic pathogens. Say that fast 3 times, PPPs. So what does this mean? What this means is you have a group of biologists around the world, a small group, who specialize in enhancing the deadliness of viruses and how contagious they are. It's a small group. So GOF and our government in 14, even before this, has been actively involved in doing this. This is getting no press anywhere. So let's talk about the COVID virus. And you've heard a lot of people say this was, nature. It didn't come out of the lab. It wasn't man-made. Well, some of the science sites I've been to, I'm a business background, so having to read all this stuff about biology and chemistry, it made my head spin. And this chart I blew up and I found, what I want you to focus on is this PRRA, and that was a specific type of gene protein that was inserted into this bat virus. And this insert is not in any of these other close cousins, other bat, or here's the pagolon that some people said it came out of that. Well, you don't see this here. So this is the smoking gun that this virus was man-made, it was in the lab, and it did escape Wuhan, China. And anybody that tells you otherwise, they're lying to you. And the reason why the press and the media doesn't pick this up is this is highly technical. And let's face it, to be hired and be a journalist on TV, PhD in science and biology is not one of the top ones on the list. Attractiveness, I think, is much higher. So Fauci, who is head of the NIH, was confronted about some of this, and Newsweek did a great article back on the end of April about the work of gain of function research. And then you can see some history here. We've committed money to this, $3.7 million for 6 years to research, and prior to that, another 5-year project, bringing the total for $7.4 million. So we've been using taxpayer dollars to do research on gain of function research on bat coronaviruses. So, and it's been a decade ago, there's been research on bird viruses, and Dr. Fauci, and I can understand this argument. He said the research was worth the risk because it allowed scientists to look at it and say, well, if a pathogen and pandemic has resulted, we would know how to fix it or treat it. But I don't think they focused enough on the downside versus the upside. And the downside is if this gets out as it has, we all know what's happened. What is the upside of this? So I think it's a big problem. And when he was asked to comment about this, he refused to comment about it. I think it's because he does not want the media and the people to know that he was complicit in this research that's going on in a Chinese lab, that we basically outsource something that is highly, highly deadly to the Chinese. And this lab has been documented in 2018 of having a number of safety protocols, So why did we do this? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's very disappointing. So if you kind of look at this, in a summary, the NIH, again, director is Fauci, and the Wuhan virology, they have been working together, working on these bat SARS viruses. There was a genetic alteration. It did escape from this lab within a few hundred yards. But here's the part that's really disturbing. The gain of function biologists went into 100% CYA to say it was natural and could not have possibly come from a lab. They're saying that because they don't think people will find out and look at the genetic breakdown exactly what happened. So that's just very, very disappointing. So the conclusion is, and this is the question that should be asked of the media, not about, well, how do you feel about all the deaths, president should be reelected. This is the question that should be asked. How did the PRRA get into COVID-19, the CYA behavior? These studies should never have been done. And there's a famous quote, most of you have seen the Jurassic Park movie that came out in '93 when Jeff Goldblum was talking to Richard Attenborough about, Richard Attenborough asked him, what do you think of the research we've done, creating these dinosaurs out of these fossils or eggs, they were fossilized. And he said the scientists were so preoccupied on whether they could, they never stopped to ask whether they should. And I think that's what's happened here. And it's very, very unfortunate. This country and the rest of the world will have much better safety protocols. China has a lot to answer for, but I think also some of our doctors and leadership needs to be a little bit more forthright in what it is they're doing. So I just find this disturbing. So let's talk about some good news for a second. Sweden has gotten a lot of press because unlike the rest of the world, they didn't adopt the Chinese Wuhan lockdown and basically cratering their economies. So they wanted to keep public life as restricted as little as possible, protect the elderly and the high-risk group. See, and they didn't do a lot of testing. They don't wear masks. They don't really do social distancing. And they figure that 20% of Stockholm, Sweden's largest city and the capital, has already reached immunity to the virus. And they think they may reach herd immunity in a few weeks, so maybe by June. And herd immunity is the ideal situation to achieve before a vaccine is established. So let's look at some of the numbers. So I want to focus on three things here. You look at the total cases per million, and this is the United States, it's about 3,900, and the total deaths per million population, 233. And this moving line here, the solid line, is a 7-day moving average. So you see it's kind of flat. It's starting to go down a little bit, but it's pretty flat. And again, we've been in the shutdown mode, or a good part of the country has, as well as the rest of the developed world. So here's Sweden. Their cases per million are about 35% less, but their deaths per million are about 25% higher. But look at their line. It's very similar to the United States. Actually, it's trending down more, and maybe it's the herd immunity taking effect. The key difference is they did not shut down their economy. And because of that, they don't have the huge unemployment that we have. I think I just saw a statistic today. It's 14.7, 14.8%, the highest it's been since the Great Depression. And part of what Sweden has is they're in a northern European country. They don't have as much air conditioning as we have here. And I'll show you a slide here in just a second where being inside is not good, for the virus and potentially catching it. And this slide here, it's very similar to the other one. This shows the U.S. daily deaths per day and cumulative deaths. You can kind of see we hit a peak here mid-April, and it's been trending downward. And this is the cumulative death line. It's horrific. I know we're north of 75,000 now. Then if you come down here and look at the United States map, green are states that have partial reopening, are going to be opening very, very soon. The yellow states are shut down. And what's kind of interesting is that if you were to substitute these colors and make the yellow states blue and the green states red, that's probably very high correlation to how these states normally vote. And it seems like the states that have more strict controls are wanting to stay shut down longer. Why am I telling you this? The longer we stay shut down, the worse it's going to be for our economy and the markets, and for people that are unemployed. You're going to see more violence. taking place. And again, it's a delicate balancing act. How do we open up safely? And granted, say New York City, right here is the epicenter, and you have people living on top of one another, and you have them inside. Andrew Cuomo, I think a couple of days ago, made an announcement. He was very disappointed that 2/3, 66% of all the new cases of COVID were from people who were sheltering in place, not people who are working in meatpacking plants or fulfillment center, healthcare workers, people doing what they're told they should do. And I think that goes down to what I want to share with you here. This was a couple of weeks ago. William Bryan, who's the healthcare undersecretary for science and technology, he was basically saying, if you look at the different factors, heat and humidity, whether you're inside or outside, and if you look at the half-life, which means when you look at the half-life, half the virus dies and half is still living, and this is the half-life, and it gets cut in half and gets cut in half again. So inside, 20 degrees humidity, 70, 75 degrees. Guess what? That's your typical temperature of a building in the wintertime. Very dry air because the heat dries out the air. The virus lives 18 plus hours before half of it dies away. You increase the humidity to 80%, you cut the life by 2/3, you make it very hot, almost like a cool sauna, 8 degrees humidity, 1 hour. But here's what's really interesting. If you look at summer or being outside, you're looking at seconds or just a few minutes for the virus to be gone. And there's been very few cases, I've not seen of any, where people have gotten the virus from being outside. Now, granted, it's kind of hard to say if you get it, where did you get it from? But, to shut down the beaches in California or Florida, prevent people from going in parks, I just think that's counterproductive. And a lot of the Europeans who don't have as much air conditioning, it's only a fraction. And Tab, I don't know if you want to speak up and kind of give people the percentages of how much air conditioning that you discovered in Europe.
So US, 75% of homes have in the US have air conditioning, and in Germany only 1%, and then in France it's only 4%.
So what they do is they don't have air conditioning. They have to open the windows. And I know Europe can be hot in the summertime, but it's not as long as it is here in Dallas, and we're kind of much different. We have to have air conditioning. But you looked at Malaysia and Singapore. Early on, this virus has taken off. People said, well, if it doesn't do well in these communities, sorry guys, doesn't do well in these communities, then why are they having all these cases? And it's because they're inside air conditioning. So the recommendation we have is, especially like today, while the weather's nice, get outside, walk, get some sunshine, get some vitamin D. So to kind of summarize, we're going to formally open May 18th. We're going to be increasing our technology allocation through the cubes, QQQ, reducing emerging markets because of China. Bonds are about equal with cash now, but they carry huge interest rate risk. U.S. government debt may not matter for a long time because no one else can replace this as a reserve currency. Hydroxychloroquine works. It's not getting the kind of press in this country by our government because I think there's a conflict of interest. Gain of function experiments should be prohibited. It should go the way of the tear gas that we had after World War I. Swedish's model, which is interesting, the WHO 5 weeks ago said Sweden is going to have a huge death rate. They're going to totally collapse their healthcare system. Well, last week they came out and said, well, we think the Swedish model may be a good model for the new normal. So it's kind of interesting. WHO doesn't have a lot of credibility, in my opinion. Last point I want to make here on the presentation is get out in the sun. You can take vitamins. In a previous webinar, we kind of talked about what vitamins you should take, D, C, B, NAC. Elderberry is good if you start to get a cold. So this completes the presentation. Again, if you guys have any questions, please enter those in. And the next slide, I wanted to thank people for their very cute pet pictures that have come in. We did this because we're spending a lot more times with our pets. And my 165-pound Great Dane's not here now, he's barking. This pet here, and I know this client's here in Capel, when you see wearing a pet wearing an N95 mask, I think Clay Jenkins, the county judge, is going to probably arrest you and throw you in jail. They have openings now, especially since Shelley Luger has been released on 1,000 felons. So that's an improper mask use, but it's a cute picture. And then we have some cats here, and these particular clients live in Flower Mound. We've been to their goat farm. They make some really, really good high-end cheese. But thank you everybody for sharing these. This particular client moved from California to North Carolina. They have very beautiful dogs with bright blue eyes. I think they're huskies, if I remember correctly. So thank you guys for sending all these in. And then the last thing I want to cover is we had this food bank donation program of $10,000. Well, you guys donate over $13,000, and these are some of the recipients. And instead of just doing the North Texas Food Bank, about 20% of the clients at Fluent Financial do not live in the Dallas area or Texas. They live around the country. So some clients live in Silicon Valley. We have some clients in Arizona, Tarrant County, Denton County. So I can't thank you guys enough for helping out people that are really, really hurting, because with high unemployment, again, the people that are unemployed, this wasn't their fault. Yes, people should save and have cash reserves, and the people on this call have done that. Unfortunately, half of all Americans haven't saved a dime for retirement, and a lot of the people who are in the food banks are going to the food banks for food. They really do need it. So I appreciate everyone's time today. Tab, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions in the chat, but we did have a private question. So if anybody else does have any private questions, please do feel free to email as well afterwards, and we will get back to you on those too.
Okay, well, fantastic. Guys, I appreciate your time this afternoon. Get out, enjoy this nice weather, and please give us some feedback on the survey of topics you'd like to see us cover. And again, we appreciate your business and trust. Thank you. You guys have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Very good too. Bye.